It's not going to be equal, but it's fair. Big decision number 3, and this is usually the biggest worry. It's who gets what, when do they get it, and how. And a lot of the decisions here are going to determine the structural questions we started out with. So we'll get back to a few of those at the very end. But is everything going to the spouse or the partner outright? Meaning, if you're putting together this plan, everything goes to the survivor and then they can do whatever they want.
If you think it's important for educational videos like this to get out there, then please help us out by subscribing to the channel.
Look, that can be entirely appropriate. You can think that's exactly what needs to be done. But realize, and I do counsel my clients on this, realize if you're going to do that, they can take all of the money and then move it into another trust where only their kids will benefit. If you're going to do that, that's entirely possible. And that's happened on a few occasions. And even if I counsel them, look, you shouldn't do this if you're concerned at all. Oh, no, I'm not concerned. Okay, well, they made their decision, and their own kids ended up getting cut out in a few of these instances. But that leads us to another part where, okay, the spouse or partner, but with some mandatory inheritance being sectioned off. Now, what I mean by this is the way we set up a couples trust, when the first spouse passes on, we can have different, I call them compartments, that kind of pop up in the trust. And the money can go into that compartment, and it's really kind of set aside so that it's there for the spouse if they need it. So that you end up with, it's mandatorily going to go to the beneficiaries that they chose, which could be separate beneficiaries, or it could be no, we're dividing everything equally among all of our kids, regardless of who the parent is, for at least 50% of it. That's kind of locked in, unless the other spouse ends up needing some money. And that also can play into, well, is the spouse who survived going to be in charge of overseeing that compartment, or do we drop to that first person in the list? It really depends. And the other thing is, well, okay, what if it's just separate trusts, but with completely different beneficiaries? So this is a lot more common when I talk with couples later in life. They've gotten together much later in life, and it's like, well, I have everything that I have. I kind of want to go to my kids. They've got everything they have. They want it to go to their kids. But look, there's a little bit of overlap here where we want each other to be in charge of it. If they need the money, I don't want it to be denied to them, but at the same time, I don't want to just give it to them. Totally fair, happens quite a bit. Often that's when we have separate trusts, but they will be each other's first in line trustee, and maybe there are some provisions for allowing some money to go to the spouse, again, if it's a need and they've kind of gone through their money, but it could be protected otherwise. Another one that's just very, very simple, and if it's a joint trust, it's Doesn't matter whose kid it is. It's all going to be equal. One person has 2 kids, the other person has 4 kids. We're dividing everything 6 ways. Okay, that's fine, but well, what's the alternative to that? It could be everything gets split down the middle. 50% goes to this 4 kids from this parent, and 50% goes to these 2 kids from the other parent. That's with a joint trust. If we're doing individual trusts, it's a much more natural way of doing it, but then it's not really a combined thing. Now, this is the one that a lot of my clients say ends up being the most fair, and sounds complicated, but it really isn't. This is when you end up with one or both having children from a prior relationship, but they also have some joint children. It's shares based on parentage. So what we're talking about, and let's just say we're going to use husband and wife as an example. Husband has 2 kids, wife has 3 kids. They jointly have 2 kids. So that's 2, 3, that's 7 kids. They don't want to divide everything 7 ways. So what they are doing instead is, well, father's 2 kids, they each get 1 share. Mother's 3 kids from other relationships, 1 share. The 2 joint children each get 2 shares rather than 1. Well, wait a minute, how's that fair? Well, it's because there's the other family from the previous relationship that's very likely to provide some kind of inheritance. So it's the former spouse or partner would provide them some inheritance. It's not going to be equal, but it's fair. Now, you can talk about this and work at this from a framework. Well, there's not going to be anything from this parent. They're totally irresponsible with money. That's why I'm not with them anymore. Okay, that's fine. You can look at other options. But a lot of my clients where that isn't an issue, where everything is sort of evened out financially and family-wise and whatnot, they'll look at that share outline with each kid getting 1 share, except for the joint kids, they've got 2 shares because there isn't another side of the family that's going to provide them something. And let's take a look. Needs for younger children are met with conditions. And I worked on a case like this very recently. It's where a married couple, he has a daughter from a prior relationship. She didn't have any children. Then together they had a daughter. They want everything 50-50. But they'd been together long enough that they were actually paying for the education for his daughter, who is significantly older than the younger one. And so they've already paid that money. They considered it fair to make sure that their joint daughter is going to end up having her education paid for, but it's not coming out of that 50-50 because it didn't come out of the 50-50 share for the older daughter. So they looked ahead and figured what is going to be the potential educational cost that they would have been paying, and that kind of comes off the top and it's held in trust. Everything else is split 50-50 into those shares. Now, that money is going to be used for educational purposes up until a certain age, and whatever wasn't spent at that age, like 25, I'm just using that as an example, honestly, I don't remember. Then that gets split 50-50 among the other two. So it's kind of put into a holding pattern to make sure those expenses are handled. But if they don't make any changes and it's 20 years down the road, well, then it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's still going to be 50-50. But if something happens to them while they're young, it's taken care of. So those are some of the decisions on how things get divided up. Another thing to mention, because it comes up just generally with that question, what's a good age of inheritance? Now, a lot of people go, well, 18 or 21. Well, 18 because they're going to need money for college. Well, you just give $250,000 to an 18-year-old. Are they necessarily going to use it right? Are they necessarily going to spend it wisely on college? Odds are no. Well, okay, what about 25? That's kind of really on the low end, and it's really dependent on how responsible that child is with money. Most of my clients, this is going to sound like a lot, 40 is the age of outright inheritance. But remember that first question, who do you trust to handle financial things? That's the trustee who's in charge. They are going to be able to give that money early if they think they're ready for it. And they can pay for things like education and college and other expenses out of their share up until they reach 40. So they can keep an eye on the situation. You're letting them, because you trust their judgment, determine are they ready for it. So the trustee could say, look, you're 28 years old, everything's fine. I don't see a reason to hold this money back. Here you go. Okay, no problem. It's done. They could get to 40 and say, well, you're the most irresponsible 40-year-old I've ever known. I don't want to give you the money, but I have to. Well, yeah, because most of my clients universally agree. Look, if you haven't gotten your act together by the time you're 40, you're probably not going to, so holding it back doesn't do anything. So that's the kind of flexible age 40 that most of my clients pick. Well, now let's get on to the tough question, as if the other three weren't tough enough.